Bigger than capes.
Give me some Hassan.
Yeah, I was just looking forward to it, and then I watched it.
Right.
Hello, and welcome to Bigger Than Capes. This week, I am Angela, and I am joined by Will. Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. This is the first time the two of us have done one together, which is a little bit...
Is it? Is it really?
Yeah, it is. This is
Wow.
the first... I think I could go back over the archives, but I'm pretty sure this
That
is the
seems
first
unusual,
time.
doesn't it? But fair enough.
Isn't it nice just to be interacting?
Breaking new ground.
We are. Do we have any news for our new ground? We did
not
ponder
sure.
this and thought...
Yeah.
The main news is that Carmen exists as an actual hardcover.
Yeah, Carmen has finally come out. Did you say it was a year?
It's about a year, yeah. I mean, I think at one point, yeah. So the actual storyline wrapped up basically a year ago, over a year ago. I think it was May 2021. So we're expecting the trade pretty quick after that, because of course all they were doing was translating the Spanish, and I think it had been out in French as well. So all they had to do was literally just reprint it in English, and they didn't. And then it was going to be February of 2022, and that didn't happen. And now, finally, late May 2022, it has arrived and it
Finally
exists.
arrives.
Thank
I
you.
haven't seen it. I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but I have no doubt it's an absolute stunner.
It's very, very pretty. It's
That
such a
might be-
pretty book. Such a
Might
pretty
be straight to the purchase.
straight to the purchase. And if you did want to purchase it, you could always ask Zach at Volume 1 Comics.
Very
Actually,
nice.
I'll do my... There you go. Segue plug.
Good plug.
Good plug. And Bigger Than Capes also has a coffee, which none of us understand how it works or what it does, but it exists. So there you go.
Google that, I guess.
Google that. It's on our Twitter bio, I think, or it's the pinned tweet or some social media thing exists. So in the absence of any other news, we shall get to discussing a book.
Yeah.
This particular book is one that I reviewed at biggerthancapes.com, where if you want to have my issue by issue breakdown, you can do that. And it is The Harbinger from Valiant, which was started to be published at the end of last year, has 8 issues, and it wrapped up a few weeks ago at the end of May. And it is the story of Peter Stanchek, who basically, if you know Valiant, Peter is the worst. We'll get into that. And it's the story of basically what happened to Peter post Harbinger Wars 2, kind of. I feel like we're missing a bit. Harbinger Wars 2 was a mess. I think at one point he was fighting Exo, and then he sort of disappears. But we pick up with Peter, who's basically lost his memory / marbles, and he ends up in the city that is very anti-psyop, and it's the story of how he has to redeem himself and be the Harbinger. But there is another Peter who is an evil Peter, who is the Renegade.
Good naming conventions.
Yes, the Harbinger, the Renegade. Which of course are brought over from the previous run, which is just Harbinger, which introduced Peter in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's different characters come in. There's some new characters that he meets up with, who have to pick him up and show him, persuade him to be the hero that they see deep inside. And then other characters pop up later on in the second arc, such as Faith and Baxter. We will have to mention Baxter. Love Baxter. But yeah, so basically it's the story of Peter, which did not thrill me to start with. But how did you find the Harbinger / the Renegade?
Well, it's worth noting, I've only read the first trades, the first arc.
Yeah.
And and I thought it was really good. I thought it's actually pretty good jumping on point. I think it's quite a good first issue, or maybe second issue, where it gives you quite a bit more of the exposition. I've not read Harbinger Wars 2.
That's probably for the best.
I don't feel like I've missed much. But I didn't feel like I missed anything in the story either. Having said that, it references the original series quite a lot.
Yes, it does.
It feels maybe an attempt to sort of ignore Harbinger Wars 2 a little bit and to tie those dots across. But I didn't feel lost. And I think in the second issue, is it the first or second issue? It's the first issue. He basically has a conversation that just sets out the main points of Peter's journey up to this point. I think the exposition was done quite well. It's quite a wordy comic.
Yeah, there's a whole conversation he has with Cece where she's like, "Oh my God, you're Peter Stanchek, and this is what you've done," and all the rest of it. And man, there's a lot of text on. I mean, there's a lot of reading.
I think there is throughout it, because not only are you having the script, you're also having sort of Peter having this psychic conversation with himself, himself, that runs pretty much throughout the whole story. I think it's quite a good device for setting up that mystery, though. Obviously, who Renegade is and what they're capable of is kept hidden. In fact, who the other voice is kept hidden for quite a while, and that running through constantly, partially commenting on what's happening, partially talking about the past. It was quite a good through line, I think. Sort of kept you wondering what was going to happen next.
Yeah, I was going to say, because one of the things that I've been hoping that Valiant will do lately is to try and do something that is fairly newbie friendly, but also, if you are familiar with it, it's got something of value in there for you as well. And I think this does that. It isn't something, you don't have to know about Peter. In fact, you're probably somewhat you're better off not knowing Peter, because he's terrible. But yeah, it's good to sort of have something that you don't have to, because his story is basically told in that narration, like, this is who I am. And like you say, what I like is the mystery of, at first you don't know who he's talking to. It's just a conversation, and there is intrigue. I can't remember which issue he finds out who it is. Is it 3 or 4?
I think it's 3, because the first couple you're dealing with the warning.
Yes.
They're almost like the distraction villain.
Yes, yeah, I like that.
I thought they had quite cool designs, the warning, and a couple of cool powers. I like the reference back to hardcore.
Yeah.
And the sort of dialed in powers. They're not explored very much. And they are there, I think, just to set up an antagonist before giving away the sort of the big mystery.
Yeah, they're basically filler villains.
Yeah.
Bless them.
But they were cool enough. They had quite cool designs between them.
They did look good. They did. I have to say, the art generally is interesting, because it's quite different to what, I mean, that's the thing, the Valiant house style luckily has gone out the window, which is nice. Mm-hmm. But it's very angular. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I thought it reminded me quite a lot of Black Science. Is it Matteo Scolari? I think has that quite sort of sharp noses and sharp chins, and things are, as you say, angular is the right word for it. But I think the art was also in places sort of appropriately abstract.
Yes.
The colouring is kind of quite neon, especially when showing the powers, like a lot of yellows and sort of purples and things. But also you can't always see what the background looks like, or it's quite vague. And normally that's something I actually moan about a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Not doing enough detail in the background. But I think in this, because his powers are that of sort of the mind control and almost reality warping, that I think it is quite apt when it's quite abstract. That is to say, when there is background detail, I think it's, really good. I'm not saying it's never there, but I think it uses negative space well. That's
I like that. Yeah,
a better way of saying all of that.
Yeah, because it's very pink.
Yeah,
There's a lot.
yeah.
It generally the sky is often pink and purple. Pink. Yeah, which I like it because it all fits. It feels like it has a color scheme. Because of course the Harbinger costume that he comes up with. I'd love to know where he gets it from. I don't think that's ever fully explained.
I think Cece makes it for him.
Yeah, she here's a jacket. I'll just spray some paint on it.
Yeah. I don't know if this is something that was explored more in Harbinger Wars 2. I don't really understand how many Psyots there are, whether like this Psyot town is populated with completely Psyots, or is it just some and then just everybody else who lives there. I kind of got a bit lost in that aspect.
To be fair, Harbinger Wars 2 is a goddamn mess.
Yeah.
And then of course we got like the Harada solo title for a bit. Was that after Harbinger? It all blurs. Where basically Tori Harada, he's gone now. He's not coming back. So I can't remember if this specifically linked into that as well, because he went and he was the big one who could activate Psyots, and he was doing stuff with Psyot. He was the Psyot guy, for better or worse. I know Harbinger Wars 2 was a bit of a mess, and this does feel like we're trying to gloss over the fact that happened. Good for you, Valiant, because I try and forget that happened. So, yeah, it sounds like it's almost like the Psyot equivalent of Chinatown. So it's like Cece isn't actually an activated Psyot. She's merely a potential.
That's, they're the bits I didn't fully grasp, I guess, is knowing that Peter's the only one who can activate with, as you say, with Harada gone. You'd assume there aren't that many Psyots beyond the ones that we already know about.
Yeah. And it's like the Renegade is doing a lot of activation of... Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, he's doing the bad activation.
Activation.
Activation, yeah. I think that is a bit of a weakness with it, because it isn't... We know the Harbinger Wars 2 kind of blew everything apart, and railroaded Livewire into being a villain. Livewire was right. Justice for Livewire. #. Because she was trying to protect the city. That was all to do with the secret weapons, kids.
Yeah.
God, I miss secret weapons. Anyway, but yeah, it seems to be that there's this general anti-Psyot feeling because of what happened in Harbinger Wars 2, which was caused by a Psyot, essentially. It was Livewire and her, and it was all to do with Save the Children and that kind of thing. So I can kind of, having tried to bleach most of it from my brain and not reread it, I glanced through, but I didn't properly reread it. I've not reread it I read it once when it came out, and I've not properly reread it since. So I don't have a huge explanation. And I think that is a bit of a weakness, but I get the impression that it's the aftermath of Harbinger Wars. Anyone who was seen as a Psyot or a potential Psyot, we've gone, and Harada's not there for all his faults, and there was a lot of them. Don't get me wrong, he did sort of protect the Psyots in a way because he was so powerful and in control. And with him gone, there's kind of a bit of a vacuum, and these kids are kind of left out on their own. So I think that's it, but I don't understand why we've got this mix of sort of Psyots, and also because you've got Argo, who clearly is a Psyot. He clearly has powers, sort of. And then you've got people like Cece who are just potentials, who are still hanging around in the same bit. But how do you know you're a potential? How do you know that? Yeah.
I like I say, I've only read this first arc, so I don't know whether any of that gets a bit touched on more. I haven't read the previous material. When you were talking about it, I do remember I read the Livewire series, I think, that followed Harbinger Wars. So I do remember a bit of her like being on the run. I don't mind my heroes being dragged through the mud a bit, like for their eventual triumphant return. But you've mentioned a few times like Peter is the worst.
Yeah, he is though.
And I think no, you're absolutely
Yeah.
right. Like he is the worst. But that's exactly what makes him interesting. Is that he comes from like an awful background.
Yeah, he does have a sucky background.
Carries that trauma with him, but he is like a nuclear bomb. Like he's the most powerful thing pretty much on the planet, and he doesn't have the capacity to sort of wield that. I just think that's a cool concept.
Yeah. I mean, I was just annoyed with him when he did the whole, I'm just going to be up in space and just
put myself in for a bit.
Yeah, and then I'm just going to be Space Jesus. I'm just going to, sit around in space growing a beard for some time for some reason, because I can. I think you're right. I think, Peter is the worst, but he's had a terrible background and a terrible basically, he got all this power and he was a child and he just didn't know how to deal with it. And no one's really been there to help him, because the only person who helped him was Harada, which is definitely a certain sort of help.
Yeah, it's not great help.
So this is basically the first time it feels like he's had a hero's journey as opposed to a stop-start kind of a thing, because he's finally becoming a hero.
Indeed. I think it's quite a good convention. I don't know what to call it, but the sort of the split personality thing. I mean, this is quite literal. It's not like in his head. There are two Peters. One that is the sort of the worst of him, and one that's like the best of him.
It's kind of like that Star Trek episode where Captain Kirk gets into a transporter accident.
That evil Kirk comes out. There were a couple of very sort of specific bits of art I really liked. There's a bit where Harbinger and Renegade are fighting, and they fly through sort of other panels of the comic.
Yeah.
In a quite Black Hammer / Gideon Falls sort of way. There's some really nice colouring. We haven't even mentioned the lettering yet, Angela, and that's your...
Look, I'm getting to the lettering because, of course,
that's your jam.
We know who did the lettering on this.
Indeed. I always like lots of different types of word balloons and different types of sort of type to show the who's talking and how they're talking, and it adds a lot to the sort of feeling of everything going on. Loads of really good onomatopoeia, which I'm always a fan of. But there's a bit where they're having like a mental struggle between each other.
Yeah.
And half the word balloon is blue and half is red to represent either side. And as the Renegade starts to win, like the red just starts to envelope the blue. And just there's again a nice subtle way of adding to the beats of the story as they were.
Yeah, that's one of my favourite bits actually, is that whole bit where they're sort of confronting each other and the blue and the red, and then the red takes over, and then we just have them talking at each other. But I mean, the fact that there are such a lot of words in this here comic.
Yeah.
But the lettering does a heck of a lot of a job to mitigate the impact of just having loads of words on the page. There's like different. It's Hassan Ostmane-Elhaou, for those of you who don't know who did the lettering. We didn't actually mention the creative team. I will quickly mention them now while I remember to do it. So Collin Kelly and Jackson Lanzing wrote it. Robbi Rodriguez did the art, and Rico Renzi did the colours, and they all do good jobs. But yeah, the fact that you have so many words, because I've read comics that are full of words, and the way the lettering's been done just visually, it just is like, am I reading a comic or a prose book right now? And I think this does a really good job of trying to make sure that the amount of text doesn't completely overwhelm the art or the story, and I think that's pretty successful overall, even in panels where you've literally just got speech bubbles galore.
Yeah, I think that's a good point actually, because it is wordy all the time. Like there are not many pages. There are some towards the end, but there are not many that don't have like 3, 4, 5 plus like good chunks of text on the page. And maybe that's a little bit first volume syndrome of having to get a lot of information across. But as we said, like the art's really good and mostly speaks for itself. I think you could feasibly cut or edit down some of the text.
Yeah, I think you could. I think it's trying to sort of go with all the exposition, because like I said, it's a first volume. If you've not read any Harbinger related Valiant before, which is possible, you won't know quite what's going on. So we'll give you all the exposition so you will know. So it can be a bit overwhelming. Like I said, I don't think all that was actually needed. For me, the weakest page in the entire book, I think, is where he's talking to Cece, and it's just literally her telling him, oh, you're Peter Stanchek and you did this and you did that, and there's a lot there, and I think I didn't need all that. But Cece as a character, I admit I struggle with a little bit, because I don't know quite. She's obviously meant to be sort of the person who picks Peter up and dusts him off and makes him a hero and sprays paint on a jacket to make him a costume, which is nice of her. But I think at points the story sort of doesn't know quite where she's being pitched. Is she sort of a bit manic pixie dream girl, or is she, just a friendly? I mean, I picked this up in my review. My least favorite part of the art is when she's in the kitchen and she's wearing sort of really short shorts and she's mostly leg, and there's a little panel where she's sort of raising her leg up, and it just looks, I'm just like, do we have to go there? That's my only complaint really with this.
Sure.
But with her, I just don't. I'm just like, what is she? I like her, but what is she as a concept?
Yeah, I think I guess I liked the idea of him forming a sort of a new support network around him. I didn't think either of the two new characters, say Cece and young Ago, they weren't fleshed out a whole lot.
No.
They sort of get tied up in his adventure and then decide, yeah, all right, we'll stick with you. We'll go with that.
Yeah, okay. You seem a sensible chap. Yeah, I mean, Ago, Ago's basically positioned as the angry young man, and therefore we can draw a parallel with Peter, who was also an angry young man. But like you say, they're not terribly fleshed out. I mean, I don't think we really find out about the past, do they? I think we find out a little bit about Cece's. But, it's like, did they have a family? Where did they come from? How have they ended up where they are? What have they inspired? We don't get any of that.
There's something of the genre in that as well. Like it's still a superhero title, and they tend to be paced quite fast. Like a lot happens in a short number of pages, and in a fairly sort of classic Valiant style, it's a tight 4-issue volume.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of times works to their advantage. Like it just makes arcs a real breeze. They're just really easy and fun to pick up and read. In this case, I don't know, do you think an extra issue would have helped with some of that stuff? Or do you think it's trying to introduce too much too quickly in this first arc?
I think, having read the second arc as well, I think it did need a bit more breathing space in this one, because I do think, I mean, the focus is on Peter, which makes sense. He is the Harbinger, and I think it's good to have that. And I really like the character work that's done in this with Peter, both Harbinger and Renegade wise. But it does mean that because he is front and center, you're losing some of the background of the people around him. And in the original Harbinger, there was a lot of characters involved in that. You had them all in. You had an entire group of kids, plus Harada and all his people. So you had more people in that, and it felt, even though the focus was on Peter, but I can't remember if the first arc of Harbinger was, it certainly was very Peter focused, but I can't remember how much of the other guys that we had.
You certainly get Faith very early on.
Yeah, we get Faith really early on, and the crew, but
that first series is about five volumes long, wasn't it? So.
Yeah, it was big. Whereas this is now sort of done. Like, we've had there'll be 2 volumes, and it'll basically be done and rested for a bit. Mm-hmm. I think it would have been nice to at least have some of the background of, because Peter's fight, Peter decides that I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to fight for these people because nobody else is. I'm going to stand up to them, protect them, and save them from the Harbinger. Not the Harbinger, the Renegade.
The Renegade, yeah.
Too many Peters, too little time. Because he was the Renegade, but he's also been the Harbinger. But it would have been nice to sort of get an idea of, and I think they actually do that better in the second volume, because in the second volume there's more stuff with the Renegade, and there's a whole bunch of other characters. And I mean, they are paper thin, but there'll be a little paragraph like, this is, I don't know, Martha. Bad choice of name, but it's the only one that came to mind. She woke up this morning to go and do her shopping, and she owns a cat, and she's not going to go home to the cat kind of thing. There was a tiny little paragraph. There was loads of panels of different people who were being affected by the Renegade, but it gave you a little bit of biographical information about each one. Yeah, paper thin, but in a way that was a bit more successful than just, there's some people here, there's a city of people and they need help and the Renegade's here. But I get why it's done like that, because this is really Peter's story and everyone else is playing second fiddle, but it would be nice to have a few more strings on those fiddles.
That's fair. I think I would probably concur, but I've not read the second half, so I'll reserve full judgment. What did you think of Peter's costume?
I like it. I think I can't work out whether it's sort of lycra and tight fitting underneath, and how did Cece sew that with such excellent measurements? I think it's good. I think it's because it is very superhero-y, because traditional, you've got sort of a very tight fitted bodysuit that is probably made of lycra. And is very traditional, but then you've got like the jacket with the graffiti on it, which is more street level. I knocked this up in my garage.
Quite 90s.
It is very 90s, and I have to say, and then you've got the mask as well, which is very sort of pointy, and it does feel very sort of 90s edge kind of thing, and as a result I like it, because I have no taste. I thought it was quite a clever move to sort of go back to that, because Peter's never really had a superhero-y costume before. So it's interesting to see that he's gone for something that's quite classic, but also there's a little bit of a personal touch to it. And I like how the Renegade's just like, no, I'm just going to wear cloaks. Just going to wear cloaks. Yes, yeah, I'm just going to hide my face all the time.
I mostly like it as well. I like that it's in quite clashing colours. I'm not a huge fan of the mask, but I think most masks look sort of dumb.
Well, there's always the question, like, and particularly that one, because it comes up and over, and then there's a little bit that sort of sticks to his chin as well. Which
I'm not a huge fan of the chin bit.
No,
I think I agree with you about the jacket. I like the sort of what do they call it? Like what's it called?
What?
When it fits on, it closes on one side, double-breasted.
That's the word, yes.
Double-breasted jacket. Yeah. So I like a lot of the design, but the mask I'd leave it if it were me. Sort of defeats the point of him not being recognised as Peter, but nevertheless.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, everyone knows he's Peter anyway. Pretty much anyone who matters knows he's Peter.
Indeed.
But bits stuck on the chin. I'm just like, have you super glued that on? Have you? Yeah, is there a bit of double-sided tape on it?
That's quite like Gambit 90s X-Men, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sort of headdress stuff. I did notice a few quite subtle references, like was a street called Dysart Avenue.
Yes.
From is it Joshua Dysart?
Joshua Dysart, yeah.
And does he talk about his powers early on as like being a sting in his head?
Yes.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the 90s, wasn't that his like nom de hero was Sting, and that he was originally well, oh no, it's John Constantine has the likeness of Sting.
Somebody, there was a Sting in the 90s. There was definitely a Sting in 90s Valiant. I'll swear to it.
I think it might have been Peter Stanchek. I think that might have been his whole thing.
His whole
but yeah,
thing
you're our resident 90s Valiant expert, so you have to hit the archives.
I'll have to go, but I do have quite a bit of the old Harbinger stuff. It's not one of my big ones, I have to say, but I'm working on it. One day I will own all the 90s Valiant. All of it. Slightly worrying concept, but there we are. Yeah, I have to say, oh yeah, that's what happened. Sorry, I was just flicking through and I just noticed the cat. I'd forgotten he picks a random cat up in an alley and flies off with it and then just leaves it on a rooftop.
And then just puts it down. See ya.
See ya. I'm like, I'm not sure. Was did he need to have a word with some sort of animal? Did he need to sort of talk to someone and figure this cat's a good listener? That was a bit random.
It was a little, wasn't it? As if you were going to introduce it as like Peter's little pet, and then he just within 2 panels goes, nah.
No, just leaving it on the. I've taken it up to stare at the moon and have a chat, and then I've just come back down to earth and just popped it on a rooftop, and And
that's that.
I do like how when he sits down, he does that. He crosses his leg and floats a lot.
Yeah, and his mind wanders, and he just sort of all gurus it up, and you get the little reference of the bleeding monk. He hasn't been around for quite a while.
I do miss the monk.
I think Valiant have done this a couple of times where different series have either coincidentally or basically stolen each other's idea. Do you remember in Ninjak there's also, is it just called the Eternal Monk or the Sleeping Monk?
Yeah.
Or
there's the undead monk. There's the undead monk.
But it's not the same as the bleeding monk.
No.
Despite, looking and acting pretty similar.
Yeah, but the undead monk is undead and the bleeding monk is a bleeding monk.
Yep.
There lies your difference.
There's so obvious now.
Yeah, it's always a shortcut though, isn't it? Like, we'll just borrow that concept a little bit. Because some of this feels a little bit secret weaponsy in that you've got sort of the kids who've been left on their own trying to defend themselves. So, yeah.
I think overall, of all the sort of little departments of Valiant, Harbinger's definitely amongst my favourite. I think that the 2012 series was the first thing I read. And as you say, the spin-offs of like Secret Wars, The Life and Death of Toyo Harada. What was the other one that's Harada focused? Imperium. That was really great. I'm glad that this is a decent continuation of that sort of story. I guess I don't want it to be completely focused on Peter, which I'm sort of happy that this lasts for 2 volumes, and then maybe it's the doorway to more Psyot stuff, that kind of side of the Valiant universe.
Yeah, because we've not seen the Psyot since Harbinger Wars 2 for obvious reasons. But yeah, it's interesting that they're exploring this bit of the universe because they've got all the stuff going on with Book of Shadows and all the supernatural guys getting together and fighting evils, and Archer and Armstrong are back. But this is the first time they sort of picked up Peter and tried to do something with him. Spoilers for future issues. Faith does crop up and Faith does play quite a large part in events moving forward. I mean, she does appear at the end of this, like, hello, there's just a panel of Faith. Like, hey guys, remember Faith? And I was a little bit wary about that because Jodie Houser's run was so excellent.
It was.
But Faith is back and Faith is good, so we like a bit of Faith. So, but what's interesting is she's the only one we bring in from original Flavor Harbinger.
Yeah.
That group. She's the only one. And the other ones are around. I think. I can't remember what happens to half of them in Harbinger Wars 2, or even if they appear.
No, 'cause most of them are in Harbinger's Renegades, but I don't really remember how that finishes.
It doesn't really, as
No.
far as I can remember. They're on a farm. They're in a farm, and Animalia appears, and stuff happens.
Yeah, and they murder your favourites.
Yeah, and then they all die. And then there's death. Much, much death. I really hope that. See, I was kind of hoping that we might get some of the Gen Zero kids appearing, and we do in the second volume because Baxter's back, but no one remembers Baxter because he was one of the lesser Gen Zeros. He wasn't one of the main ones.
Not one of the big ones, no.
No, but Baxter. Yeah, but Baxter's back, and it's exciting. And I care deeply about Baxter in a way I never did, because all the others are dead and he's still alive now. So clinging to Baxter. Like, come back, Gen Zero. It would have been, it would have been nice to sort of see a little bit of that aftermath in this, not just Peter, but the other Psyops that we know and love. Mm-hmm. I get why we haven't, because again, it's the Harbinger, it's Peter, it's all about Peter and his mental desperation to be better.
Yeah.
And he gets there, and as a character study, it's excellent. But yeah, it would have been nice to sort of see a few people crop up from previous. But I get why they didn't. I get why we've gone for original Ego and Cece. Not that I'm a massive fan of either of them, but I think if you had brought in somebody more well known, they might have been more. People will be like, it's Peter. I don't like Peter. He's the worst.
Yeah,
I want to know more about this character.
Hopefully, they've got their own plans. Like, I quite like Valiant's willingness to rest characters when they've got nothing like especially good to say. And they don't seem to be, whether it's just forced upon them by their release schedule or whatever, but they're happy to put stuff down for a bit or make things as one contained arc and then give it a year and pick it up again. So it makes me hope that some of these other characters are still have fires in the poker. No, poker's in the fire.
Fires in the poker.
Close enough. Because I'd still like to explore more of that sort of side of things. I say the secret weapons kids are, I assume, still knocking about, and they are weird and interesting powers, and obviously Faith's connection to Archer as well.
They're still dating. We have confirmation they're still dating.
We have confirmation of that. So yeah, I mean, I'd like another Faith series, but as long as she keeps cropping up, it's just good to see those characters around, I think.
Yeah. I have just discovered, reading the back matter of Volume 1, that it's coming back to me now. They live in Psyops City, so it is a city of Psyops, and I think they were probably herded there post-Harbinger Wars 2 in order to keep them out of the way. That rings a vague bell. I like how even in the back matter we have to mention Harada.
Yeah.
Because we just do.
He was great. Yeah. He was one of the best villains in the whole universe. I think Harada was top.
Yeah. He also had a point at some. Yeah,
that's what was good about him. Yeah, he wasn't evil. Wrong. Yeah, Psyops City is a bit kind of reminiscent of where the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are at the moment, where they've got like a part of New York for mutants, and of course X-Men had Mute Town.
I love they just call what should we call it? Mute Town. That'll do.
Town. Yeah,
that'll do. Makes sense.
So it's not like the newest idea, but I always think it sets up for potential of good storytelling when you have this small feared group of very powerful people.
Yeah, I mean that's the irony, is some of these Psyops don't have interesting powers.
No.
I mean, Ego's power's a bit weird because it's basically he's an antenna. People listen to him. And it's like, is that a superpower there, or is that just he's a really good speaker?
I do quite like that. I think actually throughout all of the series, most of the powers have often been quite original. It'd be easy to lean into some of the X-Men stuff. But I like that you get particularly the secret wars. There's the guy who can just turn into stone and turn anything he touches into stone, but then can't move, like he just becomes a statue.
Yeah.
The guy who can materialize anything, but doesn't know what it's going to be.
No, and usually it's an umbrella or something equally useless.
A balloon, or he materializes a shotgun while he's supposed to be at work.
Yeah.
Can't explain it. I like that the powers are sort of a bit weird and slightly useless. I think it forces writers to be quite smart with how they get it across in the story.
So and you have like Nikki who speaks to birds in Secret Weapons as well.
Yeah.
And it's just like that's her sole thing is she talks to birds. She can have a conversation with a pigeon. It's interesting because you have got these really powerful psyops like Peter and Faith who can fly and punch, and I mean Faith is one of the most superpowered psyops, and you've got like Talk who's just really, really strong. Bless him. But yeah, a lot of them just have completely random useless powers.
Yeah,
which is nice. So Aego's is kind of, it does fit into that general not amazing powers thing, like
that it's not immediately like combat, and it's not necessarily that you convince people or that you control their mind. It's just that they sort of have to listen. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, they have to listen, which again in a battle situation it's not ideal. It's just like, stop, you must listen to me. Yeah, it doesn't he's not gonna defeat many people just so people, because they listen to him, I guess. It's just, bless him. But he tries. He really, really tries.
Yeah, at least it's pretty cool power.
I mean, it's not the worst that we've seen.
No.
And yeah, Cece's powers when they come they exist.
Okay.
I don't fully understand them, I'll be honest. I've read that issue several times. I'm still not entirely sure. But I like how the Renegade is basically, he has all Peter's powers because he's Peter. So he's like, how do you defeat yourself?
Mm-hmm. And of course, it came with a story of reconciliation and like trying to accept those parts for yourself, I think. But obviously, Renegade then, at least in this first arc, gets away.
He does, yes. He will be back.
He does return.
He does return. He returns in some interesting ways. There is another character that's introduced as kind of a villain. It's a bit of a weird there is a point to the character. Without trying to go too much into spoilers, there is a point to what happens with that character, but they're not Renegade level.
Right, I'm with you.
They're not Renegade level. I've just noticed on one of these where Peter's just pondering his self and his existence. I like how they've got all the art from sort of the old Harbinger series just in little blocks.
Yeah, like some of the old covers and things.
Yeah. And just done it there. And I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. That's
nice
like
little references.
Using your power like a reference. I like
Harada does make it into the comic.
Yeah, Harada is in there. There is a shot of him in there being all Haradery. With being sort of angry looking with glowing eyes, which is what he does.
Mm-hmm. It's his whole shtick.
But yeah, I have to say, it's interesting. I like when sort of Harbinger and Renegade meet and then they're going through the Let's Remember together. Just does remind me of the duel between Harry Potter and Voldemort in the film. It's just like, let's end this as we started together.
It's forever set the precedent for magical or psychic battles.
Yeah.
They are quite hard to show in a visual medium. What two minds look like. No, but overall, I enjoyed this. I'm certainly up for getting into the second arc. So I think it fixes a bit of that Harbinger side of the universe that was getting a little bit carried away with itself, maybe.
Yeah, it was kind of, it didn't, I mean, I think I mean, the idea of Harbinger Wars 2, I think, was because Harbinger... Like, we've not even mentioned the original Harbinger Wars, because for there to be a Harbinger Wars 2, there has to be a Harbinger Wars 1. And we've not really mentioned that at all.
My whole thing with Harbinger Wars 1, just while we're on it,
Sure.
I think the story's actually perfectly fine. Like, I think there are some like really good peaks in it. Folding in Bloodshot into it, I think works quite well. I just hate the way that it's spread over like silly issues, and that makes the reading quite jarring. You're flipping artists, you're flipping like bits of story where you're picking up the narrative from. It's a bit of an imperfect gem. I actually think the core story is pretty solid.
Yeah.
But it's too bitty, it's too fractured.
It is. Much like some might say, Harbinger Wars 2. Which is, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Events are hard.
Yeah, events are hard.
Normally not worth it.
No. Particularly sort of in Valiant, where it's bizarre because you'd think a shared universe like this would be really good for events, and it tends to be the opposite. Like, if you cross them over one-on-one, like Eternal Warrior showing up in Archer and Armstrong, or showing up in Ivar Time Walker, or Dr. Mirage crops up with Faith later on, and just like one-on-one, or like The Delinquents where Archer and Armstrong meet up with Quantum and Woody, those work really well. But then when they try and expand it out, it doesn't always quite hit the mark.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Which is bizarre. So yeah, it is nice to sort of see the Harbinger corner of the Valiant universe getting back on its feet a little bit. Admittedly through Peter. But it's fine. So yes, overall, 'tis a good book.
Absolutely. I think I've probably hit everything. Oh, one thing I did, I mean, we talked about the lettering and everything, but at the end there's a to be continued.
Yeah.
And I always liked how that was set out, like the to be, I think, is in the T of continued. And it was a very tiny thing, but when I looked at it, I thought, that pleases me.
I like it to be continued in a... Yeah, there are
I think it's a good design. I think that's maybe not called out enough. Good little bit of design.
No. But it is one of the best. I mean, he's doing a lot of lettering for literally everything I'm reading at the moment, but I think this is some of his best work at the moment, is Harbinger. I have to say, this is good stuff. Not to say that I mean, he's always really good, but I think it fits with the art and the storytelling, and it just, it fits really nicely into that.
Yeah.
Because it is very stylized. That's the other thing.
With a lot of voices, it does a lot to separate them and make it clear who's saying what and when. Yeah.
Which is not always easy. And there's some, there's some lovely moments. Just, yeah. I mean, it is quite, it's not what you'd call a pretty book necessarily, but it's quite a visually compelling book.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it is quite... I mean, the colouring, despite it being neon pinks and yellows, is actually quite dark. Like, things seem to be set at night or inside. And, things are kind of that a bit 90s inspired, a bit grim and gritty. Fortunately, it's not, pouches and muscles or needlessly grim storytelling, but it definitely takes a page out of 90s art. Your Jim Lees, your McFarlane's. Yeah.
Oh, you say his name 3 times.
I feel like it needs to be said. I'm just going to say Rob Liefeld, just because I think there's probably some record about saying his name a billion times.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. And it is fair to mention their names. It does have quite a 90s feel to it. Which it's nice that it's doing something good with that style, because we tend to talk about the 90s era in comics as the 90s era in comics, and there's a reason for that, because there was a lot of terrible choices and there were some weird decisions, But there was also some good stuff in there. Not to say
Yeah.
Rob Liefeld was part of that good stuff. I would argue probably not. But there was some good ideas, and it's nice to see someone like, yeah, we can be nostalgic for that period in the art. And you know what? It works.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Yeah. And also I like that the yellow comes from his eyes so much. It's like a recurring motif, the yellow light flying from his eyes.
Mm-hmm. I like a lot of the colouring for like the sense of movement, and when he's flying through the air and you get the sort of beams of light that follow, like the after image. I think that's it's all good stuff.
It is. So in conclusion, would you read volume 2 when that comes out?
Oh, most certainly.
Yeah.
Pick up the next one.
Yeah, it does. Like I say, Faith appears. There's some interesting stuff. It does feel a little bit like we have to sort of relearn some of the stuff in here, but in a good way, if that makes any sense. And also Baxter is in volume 2, and yay Baxter.
Yay Baxter.
Yay, I miss you, Baxter. Gen Zero. But yeah, I think it's also rehabilitated Peter a little bit for me, because it's nice to see him actually you're on his side and you don't feel conflicted about that.
Yeah, that's nice. I think knowing that it's finite is actually more appealing as well, knowing that it ended and wasn't cancelled.
Yeah, it was like, we do this and we're done.
Yeah, that makes it a bit more of appealing to get into, to invest in.
Yeah. So I think we have covered it. Writing good. I didn't actually mention the fact that 2 people wrote this, and it's one of those that you can't actually tell.
No, I would agree. There's no obvious point where one gives way to another, or I'm not sure what the arrangement was. So yeah, good job being a sort of cohesive unit.
I mean, I like to think that Collin Kelly and Jackson Lanzing each took on a character. Like, one was the Harbinger, one was the Renegade, and they like role played some of that, and that's why you get the conversation.
And somebody just wrote it down, and then there you go, script.
Yeah, I mean, I've no idea what they did, but I would think that.
Yeah, I'm going to believe that.
Yeah, that's the way I would do it.
Yeah. I'm on board.
Yeah. So, in conclusion, good book.
Good book.
It is nice to have another good Valiant book, because it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to have a nice Peter book. So, yes. So, I think, can we say we're done there then?
I think we're done. Yeah.
Hooray. So yeah, there will be a volume 2, book 2, which will be coming out probably fairly soon, since the issues are all out. But yes, that was The Harbinger. I've been Angela, and I was joined by Will. And thank you for listening, chaps.
Thanks, everyone.
And remember, we're gonna do it. We've got to do it. We've got to do it. We've got to do it.
Ready.
Okay. And remember that comics are
bigger than
capes.
Capes. Yeah,
that's not gonna work. That's terrible.